Whenever I hear the phrase American exceptionalism, or just like the concept of it, right? Like what it means, what it's implying, when people talk about America in a way of like, hey, we should be more appreciative or acknowledge, maybe more grateful, whatever, of like how amazing it is. And it's not just America, right? Sometimes people say it more about just this period of time, like how grateful we should be to live in this period of time, because in prior periods, like it was much worse, right? And they can point to metrics, right? If they're talking about it more at a societal level, like mortality rates of children, disease, prosperity, in terms of like median income and all different things in which like we are clearly better. And then you can just look at the obvious things, which is like you used to get your head cut off if somebody just felt like it, right? And that doesn't happen so much anymore. So lots of things that obviously make it seem like, yeah, we are lucky to live today versus whenever else, right? And again, in terms of like America, it's the view of like, well, look at another country and tell me another country that's doing better than us, across this. When you look at it all around, look at another country that's done what we did in terms of creating this Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And it's a very tricky line to walk, because I'll say, like, I don't disagree with a lot of that necessarily at the American level or like the macro level. There's truth to it, obviously. There are things that are much easier today. There are things about America that are great and exceptional and amazing. And it's okay to be proud of those things to an extent. It's okay to feel good about them. I can't help but feel like the sentiment is a little incomplete. It's not that what's being said isn't true. It's just not acknowledging, I think, the full picture. That emotional charge that comes with how proud we are to be American, or how grateful we should be for the positive things about living in this time period. I don't know that the same emotional charge is always there for the negative stuff that does still exist, right? Let's just stick with America for the time being. Like, sure, there are exceptional things that we have done and that we do, and you aren't wrong to acknowledge that. But we have to also acknowledge the negatives. We have to acknowledge the suffering, the inequality, the racism, the greed, the corporate corruption and the political ugliness, and you can look at to talk about American exceptionalism when you could turn on the news or YouTube or whatever and look at clips of our politicians, our political leaders, frankly embarrassing themselves, just spewing hate and arguing and pettiness and childish. Like, we can't forget about that too. And if you want to just put the emotional charge on the exceptional part, like, how are you not putting the same emotional charge on that part of it? Like, we have to be honest with ourselves about it. And just on that exceptional point, like, it's somewhat easy or convenient to fall back on this idea of like, but what do you mean? Like show us another country that's doing it better. Show us another country that's gotten this right where we haven't. And that's where the sense of exceptionalism comes in. And I don't know, maybe I'm idealistic, maybe I just set the bar higher, but when I think about proclaiming exceptionalism about something, that means you don't just rely on the fact that, like, yeah, maybe you're high in the rankings in a certain area, or maybe you're the best of a certain group. Like, exceptional, when I hear that word, when I feel that word, it means something special. And wouldn't the most exceptional thing we can do as Americans is to actually admit and acknowledge our shortcomings, acknowledge the flaws that we have, acknowledge the suffering it causes. Not that it's easy, not that it's necessarily evil or malicious, although sometimes it is, not that it's not complex, not that it's not nuanced, but acknowledge those things and actually try and fix them. Swallow our ego, swallow our pride, not just fall back on the things we've accomplished, not that they're not great, as I said in the beginning. But wouldn't the truly amazing, exceptional thing, the thing to be proud of, the thing to proclaim as an American is like, you know what we did? It's not that we created a Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. It's not that we manifest destiny across this continent. It's not that we have the strongest economy or the biggest military, or that we medicine, innovation. Like, those are all great things. Don't get me wrong. Some of them come with downsides, but those are all great things. But wouldn't the most amazing, exceptional thing be if we were like, you know what? As human beings, we recognize that there was a lot of people suffering. And we recognize that maybe it was something that we could fix and do something about. And we did the hard work to do that. We didn't just fall back on what we've accomplished. We understood that what makes something exceptional, what makes something beautiful, is that it cares about another human. It reduces suffering in some way, if it can be reduced. And we didn't take the easy way out. We did the hard thing. We looked in the mirror and we said, hey, I'm not saying this is all bad. I'm not saying we should hate ourselves and America's the devil or the worst or anything like that. But let's be honest. We've done some shit. We've gotten some shit wrong, as anybody would. That's not uncommon. Everybody gets it wrong. But if you want to be exceptional, be the country, be the people, be the person that says, you know what? I want to be better. Not because I have to be. Not because I'm not already doing well and I feel like I can just rely on that and be comfortable with it. But because I believe we should do better, because it might help somebody, because it might reduce suffering. Like, that to me is the exceptional thing. Actually forcing yourself to face the reality and say, maybe we're not as great as we thought we are. It doesn't diminish the things that we've done. It doesn't take away from pride in being an American. It just says, wouldn't the higher level of pride be if we tried to really right our wrongs, to really address our flaws? I think that's exceptional, right? Because and it comes down to, somebody could say like, well, how? That's just idealistic. Maybe. And obviously I'm no expert on this. So like, what are the specific things we have to do? That's not a video like this to cover. But I think the important point, and I'll tie it back to kind of the big macro societal view of it, of like, we should be grateful to live in this time period. Whenever I hear somebody say that, I think about it and I try and break it down, right? Let's take an example. Let's say you lived in the 500s or the 1200s, right? Medieval times maybe. And the point somebody's making is like, you could have had a child. Like, if you were born then, you could have had a baby who died almost, not definitely, but there was a very high percentage chance that they were going to die at a very, very young age from some disease. And I say, okay, yeah, that's terrible, but let's understand it, right? Why is that terrible? Well, what do you mean, why is it terrible? Because your loved one, your child, suffered and died unnecessarily because of a disease. Like, that's why you should be grateful, because the percentages of times in which that happens now is much lower. To which I would say back, like, I get that at the macro level, whereas as a society, we are doing better in that regard. But if I'm a black person who lived in America in whatever year, pick the year, and my child died because maybe they didn't get access to the right medicine, or maybe they were lynched, depending on what time period it was, or maybe they had poor access to clean water, whatever it is, right? It's still the same principle. My loved one, my child, suffered unnecessarily and died. So for somebody to say to that person, you should be grateful that you grew up in this time period, it's all relative. Like, yeah, me individually, maybe I should be grateful because I have things where I can actually look at that and see it. But there are people in the world, and it's not just a race thing. It's not just black and white, although that is certainly a thing. There are so many people in the world that are still suffering that same thing, where they see a family member or themselves or whatever suffer and perhaps die when they didn't have to. When that still exists in the world, to proclaim boldly that we should be grateful and we should be so proud, it just seems so tone deaf to me. And again, it's not to say we shouldn't be proud of the accomplishments. It's saying have the same emotional charge about the pride and the accomplishment in the pain of knowing that it's still happening. Feel equally as strong about that. And maybe then, not just to wallow in it, but maybe then we can do something to fix it. If we cared that much, if we were as emotionally charged in it. And I think the same holds true when it comes to America. To me, that mindset, that's exceptional. That's something to be really proud of. And I just don't know why we, myself included, oftentimes we don't see it in that way more often.